Are you still?
I have one last thing, yes. Thank you for our first real council meeting. Next, I want to move one more motion to place an ordinance that will be drafted by city staff on the agenda for the 24th. And I'll just very quickly read the preamble. Whereas the novel COVID-19 disease is caused by a virus that spreads easily from person to person and may result in serious illness or death, and is classified by the World Health Organization as a worldwide pandemic. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the current state of emergency in Illinois, and whereas on March 20th, 2020, Governor Pritzker issued an executive order requiring shelter in place for all non-essential workers in response to the COVID-19 emergency declaration. And whereas COVID-19 has broadly spread throughout Illinois and remains a significant health risk to the community, especially members of our most vulnerable populations. And whereas the virus continues to spread rapidly across our region, with clusters arising in retail stores, grocery stores, and household supply stores. And those stores remain critical pieces of infrastructure in our fight against COVID-19 and protecting, as well as protecting the food supply chain. And whereas large retailers with 500 plus employees nationally are the primary points of distribution for food and other daily necessities for residents of the city of Evanston and are therefore essential to the vitality of our community. And whereas the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program has reported that the United States top retail companies have earned record-breaking profits during the pandemic, and whereas establishing a requirement for grocery and home good employees to receive hazard pay for work performed in Evanston during the COVID-19 emergency will promote job retention, compensate them for the risk of working on the front lines of a global pandemic, and improve their financial ability to access resources for protecting themselves and their families from catching or spreading the virus, or coping with illness caused by the virus, and support the welfare of the greater community that depends on these essential workers for safe, reliable access to food, medicine, and household goods. And whereas to protect the food supply chain and the public health and safety, the city of Evanston must take steps to guard against turnover and ensure that large essential supply stores in Evanston have well-trained, consistent, and stable staffing. And whereas essential employees have been supporting business operations and facilitating community access to food during the pandemic despite facing a clear and present danger of workplace exposure to COVID-19 and receiving limited or inconsistent additional pay in recognition of this hazard. And whereas the dangers of working during the pandemic are especially significant for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, employees who are overrepresented amongst retail frontline workers and who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And whereas recognizing the ongoing threat to these employees, Seattle, Washington, several cities in California, including Berkeley, Long Beach, Los Angeles, Oakland, San Francisco, as well as Los Angeles County, have announced legislative efforts to require hazard pay of $4 to $5 per hour for grocery employees during the COVID-19 emergency, and more cities are expected to announce similar legislation. And whereas the city of Evanston continuously strives to be the most livable city in America, and whereas establishing a labor standard that requires hazard pay for grocery employees and household good employees who is subject to the vital and imminent concern to the community and requires appropriate action by the city council now. I move a motion that we place a hazard pay bill on the agenda. I have a draft that I will submit to the clerk's office, and I would like to see that on the agenda for the 24th as well as a special order of business. So I move that as well.
Before entertaining a second, I have two items. First of all, point of clarification, are you requesting is the motion that this item be placed on the agenda for introduction or for introduction and action?
For introduction.
Agreed. And second, just the guy who's been the mayor for a half an hour and never went to law school, my reading of the rules is consistent with the notion that this vote is required, as the clerk indicated. That one member of council cannot by themselves place a special order of business on the agenda, but instead can only do so with with agreement of the majority of the council. And so I think rather than you putting this item on unilaterally, making this motion strikes me as the correct approach. Is there a second for the motion?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Burns. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Mayor,
oh,
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'm really bad at this. Councilmember Wynn.
Well, I appreciate very much Clerk Alderman.
I should change my first name to Clerk.
Councilperson Reid's ideas about this. I believe that we do have a process, a city council process for taking on a significant and important issue like this. And then rather than use the special order of business process, which is truly used for special orders of business, as we have done in the past. But this is something that requires a thorough community discussion, where we bring in all of the interests to have, which is what's a really important discussion about fair wages. And so rather than use the special order of business method, I would suggest that this be referred to a committee and go through the regular process of developing discussion, bringing in stakeholders, and having the draft ordinance reviewed by the legal staff, and so that the council has an opportunity to talk about this among ourselves and deliberate and hear from our constituents. Putting something on as a special order of business is usually something that we've had a lot of discussion about, or we're putting it on as a special topic. This is clearly a significant issue that is important that it should go through our committee process. So I won't support it as a special order of business. I would support it if it would go through the regular process.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Reid.
I agree, Mr. Mayor. I will agree with my colleague that I think I wish that we could have had a longer discussion of this issue. I wish I could have made this motion sooner, but this is the soonest that I could have made it in. We have certainly, this has been around for the last year. I think we have to do right by these employees and act now and act swiftly. And what I plan to do is, thank you, Alderman Sufferton, for helping me get in touch with the UFCW. So I plan to invite representatives from the Food Workers Union, representatives from the Merchant Retailers Association, and any renowned economists that I can find that will also be willing to come and provide testimony on this issue. We will certainly have plenty of time for discussion. As this is going on the agenda for introduction. I believe we'll have thorough discussion. And this is an emergency. We have placed orders of business on the agenda. We had a special order of business that was placed on the agenda a few years ago regarding FOIA, and there wasn't a thorough discussion before because sometimes the council feels the need to act immediately, and I can't see a better reason to act immediately than to ensure that the folks who've been putting their lives on the line for us to ensure that we can have food and access to resources. I can see no better reason to place an item on the agenda as a special order of business than that. So
Councilmember Wynn.
Councilperson Reid, there are many, many issues that are the first order of emergency, and I agree with you on that. But we have a process, and that process involves procedure and allowing everyone in the community to participate. Having a special order of business at a city council is a very foreshortened process. It's not the same as having a thorough discussion at a committee where the staff has been able to do more research and bring us all up to speed on this issue. I agree. Our essential workers are not paid enough, but I can't support something that to me is a rush process. I believe in the procedures that we have here at the city, and I believe that we have produced good legislation in the past, and I'm happy to discuss this issue, but I will not support legislation by special order of business on all of these topics. Let's use our committee system. Let's bring in all the stakeholders. Let's have a discussion with the community on this issue, and then let's vote.
Councilmember Wynn, I apologize for cutting you off. That was my mistake. Councilmember Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, supportive of the cause, and at the top of the meeting, you acknowledged me and you said you wanted to work with me in terms of economic development. And so, as you know, with the second ward being the most racially and economically diverse ward, the footprints of at least the assets that I'm responsible for, downtown Evanston, shopping center at Dempster Plaza, Main Street, the industrial area, and I want to bring us back to, and this was a vote some time ago when we were just discussing the minimum wage and moving just a couple of dollars. And the issue that we ran into, Clerk Reid, was that when we rushed that process, it did create a lot of confusion with both the business community, and I can't remember all the details, but I would respectfully ask, as someone who works very closely with my business community, that I'm gonna need some time to have a discussion with my business owners, because our decisions have an impact. And if what everyone ran on in terms of being progressive, being transparent, I think the ideas are wonderful and bold, but I use the difference between governing and activism. And I think with governing, I've learned over the years to be very mindful of all of our stakeholders, as well as being responsible and mindful of the thoughts and opinions of my council members that I serve with. And so in this situation, I would share with you, we have a job here, June 7th, just coming with downtown Evanston. We don't even have enough workers to open up our restaurants for the summer. And it would be really irresponsible for me to even vote on something that would increase the salaries when we don't even have workers to open our downtown restaurants. And that's not anecdotal, that's a real conversation that myself, a few other members of council we've had with Annie Coakley. There are at least 23 restaurants right now that will not be able to open their doors. And I think to move forward with an action that would increase wages, and you know, I could spin this both ways. Well, what a better way to get more workers than the wage raises? But again, I want to be diligent with our communication. I think there's nothing but, again, starting that conversation by making a referral is but one avenue to get us there. But if transparency is a word that we all discussed over the last 4 months, I think it'd be really prudent that I would like an opportunity to have conversations with my business districts before I could even take action on something like this. And I would hope that other members of council who support all businesses around Evanston, as we all live here, would honor that request that I'm making. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Let's make sure that everyone's had a chance to speak at least once before we call it a second time. Also a rule. Councilmember Newsman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Reid, this is a big idea, it's a bold idea, and I support the concept. But I share the concerns of Councilmember Wynn and Councilmember Braithwaite that such a bold idea needs to be deliberated, and stakeholders need to be engaged in this decision. And I would not want to risk the long-term viability of this idea by foreshortening the process. So that's where I'm at on this issue.
Councilmember Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to clarify for some of my colleagues that this would not affect restaurant workers. I have a draft that can be presented to everyone, and as I read in the preamble there, this is for large corporations, large corporate partners and large corporate retailers such as Target. This is specifically drafted, the language, to impact Target, Jewel, Whole Foods, CVS, Walgreens, the larger retailers, which, as I mentioned in the preamble there, that the Brookings policy instituted show that those corporations have had record-breaking profits during the pandemic, and in many cases, those profits have not been shared with employees. I in fact think that this would be a great bill for our local restaurants, because if our food service employees that work at grocery stores have extra money in their pocket, they may frequent our local restaurants. And I would say you're absolutely, my colleague is absolutely correct in stating that it is likely that the reason we're having an issue retaining food service workers at restaurants is, we've seen plenty of reports that show that, those workers are terribly underpaid, and in fact, unemployment is paying folks more than going to work. And so if we don't want the same situation to occur in our grocery stores, we need to protect the food supply chain. And I think that's, what's written into this ordinance, to ensure that we have workers at our grocery stores and at these critically important places. And I think, as the COVID rescue plan money comes in, I certainly think we can allocate some of those dollars toward our restaurants to ensuring that they have, the proper resources to pay their employees, because restaurants did not see record-breaking profits, such as our, Kroger, which is in your ward, Jewel, Target, record-breaking profits there, and I think that we should ensure that those profits are shared amongst the employees.
Councilmember Wynn.
Once again, this is a significant topic. We obviously we depend on Target, Jewel, these large big box retailers we can debate their impact on our society, the value of it, good or bad. And I agree with you that they have huge profits, but they still provide sales tax for us. They still provide employment for many people in the community. One of the biggest employers in that shopping center, Dempster Dodge, is Valley Foods. They have followed up and on so many commitments to the city to hire Evanstonians. They came into that shopping center when it was depressed and not thriving at all. We need to make sure they're at the table discussing this with us. So once again, special orders of business are special topics. This is something that is a critical issue throughout the United States, and we need to discuss it thoroughly through our proper procedures.
Councilmember Burns.
As far as I understand it, this is not a permanent wage increase. Hazard pay is temporary. And so I want to be clear that that's kind of what the second I'm providing is on hazard pay, which is not a permanent wage increase. I think I gave it a second because this is time sensitive. If we are to take action on this, it is time sensitive. The hazard is now to a certain degree, and even more so it was back in March. And so the model that I like, I think there's an alternative model where we might be able to do something retroactively. So Councilmember Reid and I may have differences on some of the details. My understanding is us placing this on the next meeting as a special order of business acknowledges the time-sensitive nature of the fact that this is really a response to COVID, and people are going to work every day. And again, if we are to take action on it, on hazard pay, which again is not a permanent wage increase, I think this is the time to either do it or not do it. But I just want to be clear that I share the same concerns about the impact to businesses, both in my ward and across the city, which is why I have some alternatives that in this time I would like to work with Councilmember Reid and our staff to present. But I want to be clear, I did not second something that I believe would be a permanent wage increase. And also I would like to propose some alternative ways of doing this, but we are going to move forward.
Councilmember Wynn.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we're discussing the substance of the legislation, and I think that is out of order.
Yeah, that seems fair. So I think unless there's further discussion on the motion before us, which is a motion to place a special order of business on the agenda, I think we should move to the vote.
For introduction.
For introduction only. Just in full transparency, I'm getting some conflicting guidance from different constituencies regarding whether or not this motion is in order. So my intention is, in light of the ambiguity, to ask the clerk to call the roll and to make my commitment in light of the fact that I believe the motion was made in good faith and is consistent with my reading of the rules, that should the motion pass, if there's a continued disagreement about its appropriateness, I will then, as mayor, put this item on the agenda, because I do believe that the rules call for that. So with that, will the clerk call the roll?
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Braithwaite.
No.
Councilmember Wayne.
No.
Councilmember Newsma.
No.
Councilmember Sufferton. Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton.
Yes.
Councilmember Rebel. No. Councilmember Reid.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming. Aye.
So on a 5-4 vote, the motion carries. And this item will be on the agenda for introduction on May 24th. Is that the end of your?
Yes,
call
that
to
is
order?
most certainly the end of my call of the words. Thank you.